I think I'll start by doing a brief intro. Thank you all for joining us. And I just wanted to do a little bit of an intro for Matthew, but I think he'll probably expand on that because one of the things he's been using lockdown for is to get moving on his book and to start to be a lot clearer about what his marketing proposition is, Simon, in terms of explaining what he does, because he's a bit of an unusual character, which is why we were so interested to have him. He's a bit of a disruptor, I think, in the consultancy field, which is why we were so interested to have him as a presenter and commentator during this time. So he describes himself as an innovation consultant, as coach, who wants to help people change things for the better. And he sort of disclaims that normally innovations consultants help big businesses, but he's not normal and neither are his clients. So I will let him expand on that in a moment. But he works in quite a combination of conventional and unconventional ways and brings them together in a quite an unusual way. So I'm very interested to see what he comes up with today. Having created that mystery and mystique, I'm going to hand over to Matthew to start to take you through it, because he's going to really focus on change in this webinar, and obviously that's the thing that we've all been facing and navigating over the last 12 weeks, and I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. So with that little introduction, Matthew, please.
Lovely stuff, thank you very much. So yeah, in terms of not normal, one of the ways to look at that is exceptional. And exceptional can be exceptionally good or exceptionally bad. And it's really about how you can manifest that, how you can make the exceptional a positive thing. And that's really the core of my work. So a little bit about me. My background is tech and business. On one hand, I've worked in IT for a long time, delivering new services, really big services, cloud stuff, really big implementations. But equally, I've also studied psychology, trained as a coaching manager, and explored quite a lot of consciousness research and done quite a lot of meditation work myself. So it's these two kind of slightly strange sides, and these two slightly worlds that don't necessarily align. And actually, though, that's kind of a metaphor for my work. And it's about the bringing together and the integration of different worlds so that things work better together, so that we can really move forward in different ways. It's about something that's fundamentally doing something different and within a new category. So it's what some people call blue water innovation on the business side. But for me, there's something slightly more subtle than that. And it's actually about that kind of innovation, but led from our own needs and our own self. So I think what's really interesting about now is we're in an exceptional time. We've experienced a change, a degree of difference that was pretty much unexpected. We had no idea. I'd invite you to think back to maybe in January when you were thinking about what the year held for you. How many of you sincerely thought that it would be like this now? How different is it?
I think I heard somebody on social media say the other day, I think everybody who did their goal setting for where will you be in 5 years' time got it wrong.
And it's this quality of the exceptional, this kind of breaking of the expected, that can be really unpleasant and really scary, but equally is the area in which possibilities and new potential, positive potential arises as well. Because within the existing structure, within the existing way of doing things, the only scope for improvement is to do that better. And that's great, that's very valuable work, and that's where a lot of consultants work. But for me, I'm actually more interested in the what could we do differently, rather than the what could we do that we're already doing and better. So it's a subtly different thing. It's much more orientated around potential and change. So for me, I think this being thrown into uncertainty is for many people a very scary thing. We've kind of been pushed into this, and it challenges a lot of the way that we work and challenges a lot of our capabilities and the way that we think about the world. And when you feel responsible for a group of people or for your own work or for your family, that the fear that you can no longer meet those needs, that you can no longer support that, is a genuine and scary prospect. And that can lead us to kind of close off and shut down a bit. And I think that's necessary as an initial reaction sometimes. But for me, that also closes off potential better ways of doing things and better ways of being. So it's about how you engage with this in a positive way and actually start manifesting, making the positive potential available in the situation more of a reality. So I'd like to unpick a couple of bits. First of all, I use complexity theory in a lot of my work. So I'm going to take you on a very quick tour of complexity theory. It's a really deep subject and it's an unsolved subject, so which is what makes it exciting to me, actually. It's also a weirdly interdisciplinary subject. It has people who are quantum physicists and biologists, and business people and philosophers, and it's a weird overlap space, and this is, for me, this is the exciting space. This is the space that opens up new potentials. So when I called this leading into uncertainty, I really want to unpick what uncertainty is. And people often lump uncertainty and risk into the same thing, but they're actually fundamentally different. Uncertainty is fundamental non-knowability of the system. It's about really not being able to know what will happen. And if you look at this year, we've had a whole load of uncertainty coming in from outside, something that we had no way of knowing what will happen. And when a lot of the kind of management approaches around risk assumes that you know all of the possible outcomes, that you know what will happen, and that you're just trying to move towards a certain space. So it's very different. Risk is quantified. You can put odds on a risk. You can't put odds on an uncertainty. And so it's a very different set of practices. And actually on a neuroscience level, we have different bits of our brain. This is the left brain, right brain difference. The right brain is actually the bit that's specialized in engaging with uncertainty, and the left brain is specialized in engaging with risk and change and rules. So I want to step away from the kind of pop psychology view of those. It's much more subtle than those. It's not that right brain people are creative and draw things and left brain people are kind of organized and rule following. We all use as much of our brain as we possibly can. That it would be silly not to. Why we have this thing in our heads, why would we not use as much as possible? And actually that work is the fundamental work that I do with people quite often on the internal side, on the coaching kind of side, is how can you use more of your capability to engage with the world as it is. So going back to this idea of complexity, complexity is this space that we kind of sense into, that we feel, that we become aware of complex things through a feeling rather than through a knowing, through a clear idea of things. We become aware of the kind of complication and the kind of the rules based. That's more knowing, and that we actually need to work between the two. So they're mutually supportive when they're working well together. What we understand in the world and sense in the world, and then what that actually means and how that works. And it's the working between those two spaces that's actually where real innovation lies, where real change, positive change lies. And I'd also like to explore leadership versus management. And for me, we are very good in organizations at management. That is actually the space of structure and the space of minimizing the negative outcomes in the space that we're occupying. What we're not so good at actually in general is developing the practice of leadership. We kind of leave it to chance, and we choose people who we see as good leaders and inherent leaders. But I actually think it's a capability you can develop just like any other capability. The more you exercise a thing, the stronger it gets. So the more you exercise that relationship between feeling, sensing into something and actually doing and what that means, the more you exercise your leadership capacity, whatever level you are in an organization. Because in an innovative organization, one that fundamentally exists to change, everyone needs to be leading in their own domain. Everyone needs to be pushing into the boundary of what could be. And that's the essence of leadership. It's the identifying greater potential and then starting to do that. So it's management as minimizing the risk and minimizing the downside, but leadership as maximizing the potential and increasing the upside. So I want you to think about those two things in relation to each other, and one doesn't work without the other. If you just lead, you wander off into the distance. Yes, you increase your potential, but you never manifest that potential, and you expose yourself to loads of risk. So it's about how you work with those two things together and how they relate, rather than thinking one good, one bad, which is often how we think, kind of on an implicit level. So one of the fundamental things about complexity theory is this idea of non-computability. Basically, what non-computability means is that we can't predict what's going to happen in a complex space. That's the definition of a complex space. And so when things are complex, we cannot know what's going to happen, however hard we try. However hard we try and manage things, however hard we try and understand things, there are always going to be some things we can't know. There are always going to be some things outside of that field, which is a very scary thought when we depend on, when we and the people we care for depend on us being successful, us stuff working. So what do you do with it? And for me, this is the essence of leadership, is how you develop the capabilities to successfully move into that space. Okay, sorry, there's a question there. I'm just going to take a chance to read the question and see where it fits in. Okay, so in terms of personal capability, I'm going to get to that brief. I'll get to that after I've in a couple of seconds. But that's a really important point, Claire, and that it is actually about you as a person on some very important level. Elliot, that's really interesting. A lot of this work is about integrating into our practices what is known, and that is kind of the work. Is that to some degree, what I'm talking about has been known and has been present in plenty of wisdom traditions for 2,000 years, 2,500 years, 3,000 years, but we still don't act on it. And that question is one of the interesting questions for me. So yeah, definitely, Elliot, that's very valid. So in terms of how we push into this space, I want you to think about, first of all, how you explore the space of the unknown. So what you can do is you can just take random trial and error. You can just kind of stick pins in a page, see what works, just throwing darts at the wall. That's okay. Eventually you might hit on something, but it's probably not going to be a positive. So eventually you're just going to get tired. If you're throwing darts at a wall before you've hit the thing without aiming, eventually your arm will get tired. You might hit the thing, but it hits diminishing returns. Instead, it's about aiming. It's about deciding where you want that dart to go and experimenting and trying. So it's about the narrowing in and the getting closer to the target. The downside is, what if you miss? What if there's also on the wall, there's a bit of the wall that you want to avoid? What if you've got a nice picture on the wall next to the dartboard that you want to avoid? It's about as you build the capability, as you build the ability, understanding that increases the amount of risk that you can take. But that when you set out into the unknown, you don't want to commit to any greater downside than you can tolerate. The system needs to be sustainable. You need to keep things going. You need to keep the inputs that are already there. So you don't want to overwhelm the existing system. So it's about choosing experiments that you can, that it's okay, that are safe to fail. But also whose failure teaches you more than the cost of that failure. So it's about a positive sum relationship between risk and the development of new knowledge. And that is not something we're taught very often. That's actually a very hard thing to do. And for me, that is the essence of leadership, you know, is saying, what's this? And how we can lean into this. Now, how we choose the area, how we choose where to focus, is a function of intuition, of sensing, of it can't be deterministic. We can't know ahead of time exactly what's going to happen. So we have to narrow down the field a bit. So we choose a space that we think is going to be good. And then we see, is it good? Does it work? And it's that iterative cycle, but it starts with intuition and sensing. And that role of intuition is often underplayed in the work environment. And I think, Claire, this plays to your point in both terms. Is some of us are actually sensitive to patterns that are going on, to potentials in the field, good and bad, that the overall system, that the business isn't aware of. And that can actually be really quite problematic. We can experience that as anxiety. You know, we see this thing we're kind of moving towards this thing we know is bad, or we sense is bad, or we're not moving towards this thing that we think is good, and that's frustrating. So one of the ways we can deal with this sensitivity, with this intuition, is to kind of keep it squashed and keep it down. Whereas actually, it's a very powerful thing, and it actually moves us towards the positive. So the expertise side is actually about the rules that we can follow, and the rules, how our natural capabilities make us good at doing something. And obviously those two things actually exist in relation to one another as well. So the right opportunity for you is actually something that reflects your skills and capabilities as well. And the right opportunity for your business, for your organization, is something that reflects the skills and capabilities of that organization, those that are inherent. And so, Claire, to your point, the developing the knowledge about who you are and what you're good at, and in what situations you are best, you are most effective, you are more likely to be effective, is a fundamental part of this. But to some degree, you can only do it by trial and error, by experimenting. And again, so in terms of typing, types are useful but incomplete. I think there's a huge amount of typing tools out there, and they divide reality. They say this is a useful boundary. You know, this might be a useful area, but they are necessarily incomplete. They can never capture the whole subtlety of the situation. They can never capture the depth of that situation. And so they can be useful as a starting point, but eventually your aim is not to get stuck in that box. You know, so if a typing tool says this is your form of leadership, you know, this is, explore that. That's where you explore first and then explore out from. So this is the way that you can use tools and classifications to then inform your intuition and inform what may be useful. And similarly, any other framework. So if you have a business framework, if you're working within a framework, if you're working within a theoretical framework, I know for a lot of people at the Innovation Center, you know, they're working on stuff from a research framework. It's like, how are you exploring? So you push up to the edges of that framework, and then your work is like exploring the edges. So it's that getting into the edge that's the really, really interesting thing, is how you push into that and how you resolve that, because you successfully, sustainably resolving that boundary is what opens up potential for you and other people. Now, what we're doing is we're kind of moving towards this positive outcome, rather than assuming that there's a fixed point and that it's a linear journey. We're kind of exploring in the space, and that there are other good things and other bad things than we're aware of, and that the good things that we're aware of may not be all good, and the bad things that we're aware of may not be all bad, and that there are things on both sides that we're probably not even aware of. So it's about exploring outwards into this unknowing, into this unknown space, and making it known, making it understood, making it so that other people can have the advantages of your exploration. And I mean that both on a personal level and on the level of your innovative business. So your business is pushing a boundary, or it's doing something more efficiently than someone else. Than something else, and again, there's a cycle there. Really, it's about understanding what leads the cycle for your business. Does your business innovate first and then figure out how you use that, or does it figure out how something is used and then innovate on the basis of that? So which side's leading the cycle, and understanding for yourself which side leads your cycle. Are you led by do you really enjoy greater potential, greater excitement, greater energy, greater possibilities from the work that you do? Is that really what drives you? Or is what drives you the greater security, greater safety, greater efficiency? And is that what drives, and understanding that. And some people actually are driven by the creation of harmony between the two. And some people are driven by the amplification, the increase of either one of those things. So some people are kind of within domain experts. Some people are between domain uniters, and some people use one to increase the other. And those are that's as a typology. Hopefully that resonates for you if you can think about how you relate to it. So where are we? Yeah, and so that growing out of a new situation. So we had to kind of, this is why Survive and Thrive, why I was so keen to talk at this, because this is actually Survive and Thrive. And Pearl, I think you get to the the core of it, is that it's about, you land in a new situation and you're like, how do I make sense of this? What's going on? And then you're like, well, what can I do better? How can we move out from this space? And it's that cycle again and again and again. So, and we're at that stage, we've been pushed into this uncertainty. We've kind of reaching stability now. We're reaching like, okay, this is working. We're not in blind panic mode. We've figured it out. How do we move forward in a positive way? And so what I'd like to do is in the last bit of the talk that I've got planned before we start exploring questions and exploring stuff, is really about how you take that action and how you move towards doing that. So for me, yeah, exactly, Ali, I'm literally just getting to that point. So yeah, perfect. Yeah,
you're just ahead of us, Ali. You're preempting his next session intuitively at every juncture.
Exactly. Good. So it is actually about, no, impatience is fine. It's impatience is just wanting the future to manifest, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So in terms of actually taking concrete steps, this is very much, from my perspective, about starting with your own capability, your own self, because in many ways we're kind of modeling this way of being, this way of understanding the world, this way of being in the world. And that's what we both automate in our businesses, in terms of the way of thinking about things and the way of doing things. And we both model for our colleagues and those that we are supporting and leading. So it's about seeing this as intuition leading thought, leading action. So, it's the feeling is to create, we think of innovation as the creation of innovative products, of new, different products, whether they're theoretical, service-based, or whether they're actually physical. But the only thing that enables us to do that with anything other than kind of random dart throwing at the wall is that we have thought about it differently first. And so it's about that, thinking about it differently. And that starts with thinking about your relationship with you and your work differently, and your relationship with you and what's going on differently. For me, it's about seeking the positive overlap, because what's really important, what we're trying to establish is a positive sum relationship. We're trying to establish this positive thing where we feel good about our work and we do good, where our customers feel good about our organization and working with the organization does them good, where society as a whole thinks of us, feels kindly disposed to our organization, and also is benefited by the existence of our organization. So that everything in this is positive sum, and it doesn't have to be hugely positive sum. It's actually about just pushing into that, leaning into that. So it's really about spotting that opportunity for yourself, first of all. For yourself, that means what feels good intuitively and is effective. It's the both of those things together. So it's exploring something that feels good and you think is probably going to be effective, and then seeing if it is. So because we already have our existing relationships and everything, that's about that's probably a small space. This is a risky space at the moment. So it's about not committing to too much of that, exploring into it, moving into the unknown. The goal is to establish a sustainable relationship between this growth and the stuff that the growth yields. So that's where exponential growth comes from. That's when we hit this, the upside of the S curve. That's what we're seeking in fundamentally transformative businesses. And so what we need to do is start, the place where we can do this is start modeling it. So so what does that mean we actually do? So we can get into that. What I can tell you is I can give you ideas that you will have to do. I cannot give you concrete steps for you and your organization as a kind of generality. It's as much about you deciding those and exploring those as it is about me being able to tell you what they are. So Ali, I think it's really interesting in terms of as a place to start exploring. It might be helpful to reflect on what in your work, in the tasks you undertake at work, perhaps in this area of that you're interested in, where do you sense that something could be better? Where do you sense that there could be an improvement, and that there is a positive improvement that would feel good if it got better?
And this is one of the key things really in what you're saying, I think, is that difference between the cognition and the logical process of knowing something or having done something, and the feeling into. And that's a lot of what we do in our work, is we push and ask why and why and why a repeated number of times, but we're also just feeling around rather than thinking, and that's the real difference. And I think for all sorts of reasons in our society, really, we've got an education system that is very much taught about thinking and logical process and answering questions right or wrong. And so most of us become adults having gone through that educational process, and so then to try and marry the good out of that, because there's a huge amount of benefits in logic and common sense and all of those things that education helps teach us, but to bring that into balance with the feeling sensingness of the instinct of where an opportunity is, or the instinct of where you could go, even if actually that's completely at odds with a logical choice.
Yeah,
it's a very challenging tension for some of us at the best of times, because of our education ultimately, and what the education system is orientated around. But then also, particularly, I think, in times of crisis, because the logical thing is you want to batten down the hatches, don't you? You want to maximize your runway. You want to reduce every single cost you can. And that's kind of putting you into survive, the survive mode is like batten everything down, bring it in as close as possible to you, which sort of puts you into a state where actually accessing that intuition and that wisdom can be even more challenging than it would be were everything running smoothly. So is that something that you can talk to in terms of practical ways to navigate that, Matthew?
Yeah, so that kind of that looping back on the self, the why and the looping back and the closing down are very similar, actually, from a phenomenological perspective. They feel similar. It feels like closing in. Ali, I'd rather than giving you a case study, which again is very specific, what I'd like to do is try and connect with some examples, some smaller examples that might give you a sense, a feeling for this space. For you, and some of them may or may not land. So this is the trouble with having to use language, which is all about categories and all about this stuff, to give people this kind of sense of feeling. And it doesn't always directly translate, but the idea is to use enough of them that we can come to something useful. And to your point, I think it's very much about, rather than thinking about things as right or wrong, in the complex space, in the space of work, most decisions aren't actually black and white, right or wrong. They're righter or wronger. And it's how we can make as many decisions, how we can make our decisions righter without making as many wronger decisions, which is the trial and error thing again. So it's how we can avoid as, it's a different way of avoiding being more wrong. If you see what I mean.
Being more right.
Exactly, it's moving towards being more right, but accepting that doesn't mean we have to be wrong occasionally. It is very context specific. Each event is context specific. Each person, each business is actually unique and exists in with a set of unique people, has a unique set of capabilities, has a unique history, and a set of relationships with the outside world. And it's how you mediate that so that you can move things forward.
And Ali, that's why it's really hard for Matthew to give you a straight answer of what does that mean you actually do, because what you actually do will be completely unique to you, your sense of where you need to go for yourself, for your organization, for your market, for your team. And it is completely unique. That's what one-on-one consultancy is about, right? Is getting to know you and your actual unique picture and helping you specifically. I'm just wondering, Ali, because you're the one who's pushing here, which is great. I'm just wondering, have you got like a specific, Matthew, would it be okay if Ali had a specific question or issue? Ali, would you be up for maybe being could that work, Matthew, in terms of
I'm completely happy, yeah. How
do you
to
want
share?
to have an opportunity for a little bit of a mini?
We can do this as a specific example, yeah. So in terms of a starting point in that, if it feels like an invite that you'd like to take, Ali, and don't feel obliged, please. Don't feel that there's pressure on this, because this work is a step into the unknown. Is really to look at the sense of frustration, the sense of frustration about, well, what do we do now? And that sense is that's speaking to an unmet need, perhaps for you, for the business, maybe both. And it's like there's something out there that isn't being reached. Is there anything? What can you start to get a sense of that? Can you start to name that? Why is it? What is it that's pulling that? Okay, cool. So trying new things. So really So one of the things I'd be interested to think about is one of the ways we can protect ourselves from the unknown as an organization, as individuals, is to learn as much as possible, is to learn everything in the field. Again, and this is the kind of conceptual, this is almost like the conceptual throwing darts at the wall. If I know enough, if we know enough, we can anticipate any unknown. We can kind of innovate from that space of known instead. We can build from there. The problem is, well, there are two problems with that. And one of the big problems is that eventually the things that you learn may become mutually contradictory. Because what happens when one framework says one thing and another framework says another, and because frameworks tend to be fairly internally consistent, if you let go of one of those frameworks, then what happens to the other one? You have to let go of a whole load of stuff. And logically, you have to let go of everything that you built on that framework. All of the assumptions in the past that you made on that framework are now invalid. And that isn't actually possible. We can't really do that. But that's the kind of risk of genuine exploration of knowledge. So we kind of we get stuff on top that explains it and stuff on top that explains it, and then then it all gets very complicated and we can't really act. So we don't really know what to do. And so I think for me, it's about actually, instead of thinking about knowledge, capabilities, tools, frameworks as a de facto positive good, thinking about them instead of their utility. What are they helpful for? Why does this matter? Why does knowing this matter? So actually, Ali, I would, if it would be very interesting to explore what you're trying to, what's the benefit is in trying all the things. What need does that meet? What need are you meeting in exploring everything?
Ali, I'm going to pop you on to speak. If you don't want to say very much, that's fine. But it's just much easier than trying to do it through the chat. So I've never done this before, so you're going to have to bear with me because this is my innovation for today. But I'm just going to pop you on to talk to see if we can sort of unpick this, because I'm just sensing that there's something that you really want to get to. And I think it's difficult between Matthew speaking and you typing. Yeah. So is there something, because you obviously all of us at the moment are testing lots of stuff, and there's lots of opportunities of things that we could do, right? And so the challenge is which ones of them should we be navigating after in terms of what feels like it's going to take the organization in the direction that we want it to be going in the short term and in the medium term. So do you want to give us a little bit more context about actually exactly what you're doing, the challenges you're facing, and then maybe Matthew can speak specifically to you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Can
you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I think what you're saying, Matthew, is really interesting, and it's quite conceptual and kind of academic level. And I suppose what I'm trying to say in my chat, in fact, I'm not sure everyone can see that, but I've just been asking more for something solid as examples of what you're saying. For example, my business, I run a recruitment training business. So I help small businesses to improve their employer brand, so they attract good candidates, and also develop really thorough recruitment processes so they can assess and recruit the best people. So that's in essence what I do. So in the current market, I've been trying new things. I've been putting all my training online as webinars. I've been using Zoom, as everyone has. So I'm sure I'm not alone in that with all the attendees listening. I'm sure everyone's been doing that sort of thing. And I'm trying to work out what you're saying. Have we already been doing some of this? Have we been weighing up the benefits of these things and using new technology? And is that what you're talking about? Or is there a different level that I'm missing here?
So instead of thinking about it's thinking about technology in service of what your business is trying to do for people, rather than thinking the other way around. So instead of it's actually about thinking about how you're really trying to help your clients and why that matters to you on a personal level. What is it that's so satisfying about helping your clients in the way that you do, and therefore what you can do to be more effective in making that satisfying, making that in connecting with that value. So instead of, and again, yeah, technology's incredibly powerful, but it can be, the choice can feel kind of overwhelming, and it feels like we must make the right choice almost, it must be selected. Whereas instead it's like, well, what works? What works for us now in service of what we're trying to do right now? But that means working out and being able to state, what it is that you're trying to do right now on a slightly more, a kind of higher level, so you can choose the right technology, or probably the right technology, in service of that. So for me, I think it's like, instead of being, thinking about all of the experimentation, all of the stuff, we also do this kind of intuitively and unconsciously. This is one of the other things, we almost all do some of this stuff that I'm talking about automatically. So it's not necessarily that any of the things that you have done aren't appropriate, aren't right, or any of the things that you've chosen and you've been exploring. It's actually just about bringing them into awareness so that you can see whether, you can try them on both sides, as it were. You can test them on both sides of the brain, because that.
And so, Ali, what is working for you? What isn't working for you? What are you looking for a way to filter the various opportunities that are available to you, because there's so many? Are you finding something's particularly working for you and you're wondering whether to invest more in that route or whether to diversify out of that route? What's going on for you at the moment?
Well, I've experimented and I've run one online workshop a little while ago, which worked very well, got good feedback. So I'm doing it again. I'm doing one next week on how to attract, engage and recruit the best people. So I guess from that point of view, I've weighed up how I can best service my clients and prospects, and therefore have moved to an online function, which I'm sure most other people have done. And I suppose I'm just wondering if you've got some examples of things that businesses could be trying. That, I mean, what I've done is quite obvious, I think. And I think most businesses will have done the same. They'll have weighed up, we can't do face-to-face anymore, let's do everything over Zoom or another platform. So I'm just not quite getting
so
what
really
you're
is
trying to get us to think about.
Is how you can move, is thinking about if we're, we assume we're kind of at the limits of the amount of value that we can deliver to our clients within the current technology that we have available and within the current lockdown situation. I think my question is, what can you do to explore whether that's true? What can you do to see whether we really are in the limits of the value that we can deliver to the people that we serve? And so for me, I think one of the interesting questions is, we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can make ourselves better for our clients, more effective, more attractive, whatever. One of the interesting things to look at is when you're delivering your marketing, when you're delivering your outreach, when you're interacting, how you can enable your clients to be better clients. How can you help them help themselves? So it's that looping back rather than the service. So I think that might be an interesting, how would that sit as a question? How does that feel in terms of whether that would open up possibilities for you, Ali?
I really don't want to dominate this this session. Has anyone else got any thoughts on this?
Fair enough. So yeah, so this is, it's about really, in terms of the concrete steps, is that because I cannot give anyone concrete steps without specifics. So in terms of giving you concrete steps, it would make sense to do them for you. Yeah, that really is the challenge of this work. Is it is always going to be unique, but it's about exploring what unique feels like for you. And seeing what that looks like for you and seeing how that works, making your business unique, making your business exceptional. But
I mean, I think, to be honest, Ali, to my view, sorry to interrupt you, Matthew, my view is it sounds like you're being led in this direction, that the right thing for you at this time is to be exploring this workshop thing, and that's working for you. So for me, it feels very strongly to me that you need, that's the route to continue on, because for some reason you were led towards that being the thing to do at this time, not to do video content on LinkedIn or any of the other things you've done. You've tested it once. There's no big cost to the business. There's not going to cost you anything to keep exploring that. It's working for you. So it feels actually like you're kind of in the groove that Matthew's talking about already.
I think that's a really important point, is that one of the outcomes of one of the implications of this is, if you're not experiencing tension, between the purpose of the business and what it does, or you're not experiencing tension between the needs of the people in the business and the needs of the clients, or you're not experiencing tension as a leader between yourself and the needs of the people that you work with and you support, then then carry on doing what you're doing. It's absolutely, and this is, in some ways, this is permission to let go of that need to change. You only need to change when you need to change. And so it's about being able to look for the sources of that tension, that incongruence, that difference, that edge. It's like, where's the edge? But if there is no edge, that's great. Carry on.
So do you want to jump back into the original question that was posed then, Matthew? Some examples of maybe a couple of organisations that you've worked with. If anybody else has got any questions, again, because we can follow up after this as well. So keep questions coming. Yeah, absolutely, John. In a time for change, you can afford to try things and be forgiven if you fail. Look at the number of people who had everything from yoga classes to workshops online in scruffy bedrooms and things we just would never have thought of doing, 2 weeks before COVID hit. Keep doing it just really feels like you need to keep doing what you're doing, Ellie, actually. Maybe you didn't need to join the webinar after all. But if you're naturally being led in that flow kind of state, then stay, and that's working for you, then that's where you need to be. It doesn't need to be a massive struggle at all times if you're following that sort of balance of the logical, practical, and the intuition. I don't know, I'm probably using the wrong words now, Matthew, but but give us a couple of practical examples, Matthew, to sort of help us come to the end of the session.
Sure. So I'm just going to read this question. Okay. So in terms of, let's see if I can do both of these things. So in terms of one of the things that I was working with a very early stage organization, looking at the legal profession. Someone who'd been in the legal profession, with a founder who'd been in the legal profession for a long time, but who'd also worked as a psychotherapist. So had two very different views. Legal is all about structure, all about categories, all about is and isn't, right and wrong, black and white, just and unjust. And psychotherapy is completely the opposite. It's all about kind of non-judgment and openness, and so it was a very interesting exploration of how you could explore that, how we could move that forward, and what that meant. Because the problem is there were no pre-existing categories. It's like, what is it? How do you describe what it is that you want to do when there's no word to describe it? And that's the tension. That's kind of part, therein lies this arising of tension. It's like you sense there's a thing, but we don't have a way to do it. There's not a description and then a set of steps to follow. Or you're aware of a set of steps, but you think they're rubbish, and then they make it not worth it. So in terms of Lee, in terms of your situation, I think it's, we've got these two worlds. We've got this kind of lockdown, which is what we're currently experiencing, and then we've got the back to normal. So you've got the exceptional and the normal. And both of those have advantages and disadvantages. And one of the interesting things about this exception, so if we go back to the business that I was talking about, you know, the exceptional lawyer, one who is aware of the kind of intuitive psychotherapeutic side, is like, how do you integrate that? How do you bring that together so that you get more of the benefits and fewer of the disbenefits of both situations? Because, you know, lockdown, we wouldn't have chosen it ahead of time, but for many people, I think lockdown has actually been a really interesting situation, and they found that many aspects of their life, or some aspects of their life, got better. They didn't commute, they got to spend more time with their kids, they got to spend more time outside. And whilst that meant that they couldn't do a whole load of other things, that actually opened up some possibilities as well. So it's really about seeking a situation where we learn from both, the integration of the both. Oh yeah, from the lawyer psychologist, we established a new business. We set up a set of trials to start exploring what the new business would look like and what the new service would look like. So it's a service that doesn't yet have a category, doesn't have a distinct, so I can't say, but it is a fundamentally different legal service. Yeah, it's a legal service that is not a lawyer, if you see what I mean, and it's works in a fundamentally different way. And so the next step is the spreading out of that into the world. This work was actually interrupted by COVID, so that next step. So what they now do is they help mediate legal relationships. Is that they're helping people find a better relationship around that legal thing. So they're exploring the potential and how people can create more trusting relationships with the law. So the law is all about distrust. You have to have laws when you don't have trust. That's the fundamental, you know, they're about structural trust. Is how can you create the relationship trust as well? And how can you do that to cross international boundaries in that case? Because one of the challenges, one of the difficulties of their edges, of their situation, was that, is that the legal system between countries, so as a barrier to international trade, they're not compatible. So you have one person working in one jurisdiction, with one set of laws, and one person working in another jurisdiction in another set of laws. Is what if what you want to do, what those two parties want to do, doesn't entirely fit within both of those frameworks? You know, how can you mediate that? How can you take that risk when one side, so both sides are still protected and both sides still feel safe? So that's the work that they fundamentally do now. So it's about, again, it's about opening up that possibility. So yeah, so Lee, in terms of your situation, it's very much about understanding what worked in lockdown, what was better in lockdown, and what can be continued and taken future, and also what worked in the previous situation and what didn't work in the previous situation. So it's like, how can you find an improvement? Because a rush back to the old way of working is like, well, we must do this, we must try this. And instead, for me, it's about gradual, it's about trying and exploring. It's about how can you do that? So fundamentally, it's about looking at what you can experiment with and finding scope to change things when you hit tension, when you hit an edge in your relationships at work, in your work relationships, in your concepts. How can you lean into that edge in a way that isn't going to cause overwhelm, but that's actually, and that feels positive? So wherever that arises, but it is also about exploring what those edges are and where those exist, because we're not always led to be, you know, to exploring those and doing those, and that's the very personal work, is that internal work, and that's absolutely something I can only do. That's the very one-to-one side of things, is where are the edges for you personally, because those are what you can then explore from. So it's really about that. If you want to develop this capability on your own, this is actually about doing things that are non-work. This is about doing things that are much more purely creative, much more purely in that area of kind of pushing out into that direction, things that get you into your body, things that get you into your kind of the feeling, the intuition, the energetic self. And most people already have those practices. Many people already have those practices. If you don't, or they don't serve you, then experiment, try some, paint, draw, write, fiction, poetry, whatever, journal, anything that feels good to you. And give yourself a bit of space in your working day to do that, to do nothing, to see what emerges. It could be 5 minutes, to do nothing with any direction at all, just building out that space in the day. And if you don't feel that there is space to do that, then have a look around and have a look at the bits that, have a look at what you're doing currently and find the lowest value thing, the thing that really doesn't do very much, doesn't feel very good, and see what it's like not to do it for a day and to do nothing instead, to give yourself space, give yourself the permission to allow for some space for you and the business to grow open into it. And Lee, to sorry I didn't mean to interrupt you. And Lee, to your situation, the creation of the space in that is both in terms of experiment and both in terms of what would it look like to move slowly back into doing those things. What would be a safe way of doing it that's not going to cause overwhelm, and what could you preserve in doing that from the current situation, including the security. Including the fact that one of the things we get from the current situation is that we're safer, we feel safer. So how can we keep that safety and start to move back? So yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah,
and I think from our, from the contact we've had from our members, there's been a lot of creativity on different levels that's been emerging as a result of people having the time back from their commute, having the time to be more maybe master of their destiny than on a daily basis than they feel in the office. If they can get over that hurdle, which is definitely one of my hurdles, of giving themselves permission to take that time out for that pure creativity that doesn't have, an economic, a direct, obvious economic or organizational benefit. And yes, that is really undervalued. And again, I saw something, I forget where I saw it, but I saw something, what I thought would drive my business forward, and it was like a pie chart with like 90% hard work and 10% sleep, and then it was like what actually drives my business forward was, I don't know, 30% hard work, 20% exercise, 20% healthy eating, 20% creativity. I've gone over my 100% now, so I do appreciate that there is only 100% to be had. But
I would challenge it. So
balance and maybe people have learned something about what that balance can be from themselves during this time that they want to preserve. But Lee, I'm glad that's been helpful for you. I think Daisy's about to pop a couple of links up now with regards to the kind of sessions that we're running for people at the moment, because we're part of why we wanted Matthew to come on is because we're recognizing that at this time there's another new set of challenges, right? When we went into lockdown, there was the set of challenges which was, how do you preserve your business, how do you still pay the bills, how do you support your staff, how do you work from home, all of those kind of things. Then there was getting used to it, then there's how can we optimize it, and now we're into the phase of coming back, and then what does the future look like in terms of
exactly how
working together in an office, or some people in an office and some people at home, or what's the customer going to want now, and all those kind of things. So I think Daisy's going to pop a link up now with regards to exactly what our offers are, if you want to drop us a line, and we can help you with coaching around those areas. And also we'll be following up in terms of the details that we have got. Yeah, there we go. In terms of Matthew's details, if you do want to explore this with him in some more detail, because like he said, he's given you it is a very general overview, because it's a complicated thing to explain in terms of the neurology and the side of it and how all of that fits together. And it is really something that he can only facilitate one-on-one. So what, as our consultancy, as you know, our consultancy with one client is entirely different than any consultancy we do with any other client. I'm just being told now that my internet connection is unstable, so I'm not sure whether you can still hear me.
You did break up a little bit.
So yes. I just want to say and the European Development Fund, whose funding has allowed us to run this series of webinars. There is a slide which I don't currently manage to, everything's unstable on my computer at the moment, but these webinars are funded by them and done jointly with Gatwick Diamond Business. So we just wanted to say that thank you. Obviously, a big thank you to Matthew. If you've got any questions after this, because it has been quite a theoretical session, so if you've got any questions after this, do come back to me, or we'll let you have Matthew's details and you can ask him some more specific questions, because I'm getting a sense that you'd sort of like to maybe get into it in terms of how it could work for your specific business issues, and I'm sure Matthew could take you through that. So if you want to contact us for business support inquiries, the links are there. You can download this whole chat at the end of it by, I think, clicking on the little 3 dots that are on the side of that panel at the bottom where you type your messages and saying save chat, so that when I close this session, you'll still have everything that people have said and you'll have all of those links. Next week, as Daisy's just saying there, we're looking at sort of a summary of what's come out of this great home working experiment. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the challenges, the innovations, all of those kind of things. You cannot save chat on webinar mode. John, can we not save chat on webinar mode? That's very
I think panelists can, but attendees can't.
Oh, okay. I have saved the chat, and I will make sure that you are a Zoom master, John. Well, I stand corrected. I couldn't possibly challenge that assertions. Thank you, John. So I have saved that. We will make sure that all those links come to you in the summary email that we send to you once we finish this. But I hope you found that useful. A little bit different than some of the previous webinars we've done. And if any of you do want to connect with us or connect with Matthew afterwards, please do that. And, you know, just good luck to everybody as you're navigating the right way for you and your teams and your businesses to take the good out of what's come out of this COVID experiment that we've all been part of, and how to move that forwards and how to, you know, find that edge with the challenges that your particular business has got.
So yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this, and thank you everyone for the questions as well. So in terms of very quick takeaways, I'm just going to summarize myself. If you are experiencing an edge, if you are experiencing tension, lean into it, try it in small ways. If you are not experiencing an edge, not experiencing tension, relax, don't do anything, just for a bit, just try it for a bit. And that's basically it. Which is stated incredibly simply, but very hard to do. So yeah.
Okay, thank you all so much for joining us. We hope to see you next week for the Great Home Working Experiment. And otherwise, have a good week and make sure that you spend that time doing those creative activities and just see what happens. And let us know what happens, because we'd love to know, if you do make that time in your day and you haven't been, what the differences are that you find. So thanks a lot, and we will hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew.